Good afternoon, everybody. It's Sean Rooney, Chief Executive of Leading Age Services Australia, and I welcome you all today for a webinar specifically around the Aged Care Royal Commission. The purpose of today's webinar really is to provide our members with a case study of a service provider survey submission that is prepared by one of our members. And the intention here really is for that case study to share some of the insights and the experiences and reflections of that process with our other members who are currently preparing their own submissions for the Royal Commission. The structure of today's presentation is just a quick overview. We'll then hand over to our keynote speaker to provide that case study presentation. We'll throw it open to Q&A through the usual channels, and then I'll provide just a quick update on the Royal Commission following the directions hearing that was conducted last Friday. On your screen at the moment, you'll just see some details around technical support. If you have any issues there's a 1-800 number and also an email address. And the question and answer functionality, there's a button on your screen that you can use to submit a question at any time during the webinar. That'll come up on a screen in front of me, and then at the appropriate time we'll pause and then start asking and answering some of those questions. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Rob Ory, the CEO of Montefiore, and you'll hear from Rob very shortly when he walks you through the case study presentation. Just before we do that though, I'd just like to make some notes, some commentary just around today's presentation. The intent here is very much to support our members, to support the work of the Royal Commission. And so what we're looking here is focusing on the process of preparing a submission and not necessarily the content. Just for all of our members, please note that we did consult the Aged Care Royal Commission when we considered providing this service for members, and they were supportive, as they could see that the intent here really is very much about supporting our members to fully support the Royal Commission process. With that in mind, I'll now hand over to Rob Ory, and he'll now walk us through the case study that he has prepared. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you very much for the invitation to present to our members. Just a bit about Montefiore, maybe first, for those of you who don't know who we are. We're an aged care provider operating in Sydney. We've been operating for about 130 years, so we're quite an old organisation. We're a not-for-profit charitable organisation, and we operate 4 residential aged care services. We operate adult daycare services, and we also have an outreach and home care division. Our submission to the Royal Commission obviously relates to our residential and home care division, and within our residential aged care campuses, the 4 facilities that we operate, we have a total of 740 residential care places. As Sean has alluded to, the presentation or the case study I'm going to give is going to focus more on the process we undertook as an organisation. We've never presented a submission to a Royal Commission before, so for us it was very much a learning experience as well. The process we undertook may not necessarily be applicable or appropriate to your organisation, really depending on your own organisational structure and your particular circumstances. But in terms of the process we undertook, initially when we received the request or the invitation in inverted commas, we immediately briefed the Board of Management. It was very important for them to know that we had received the invitation from the Royal Commission. They were already fully aware and fully briefed on the Royal Commission itself, the establishment of the Royal Commission itself. Obviously they were quite supportive in terms of us making a submission to the Royal Commission. We then established a working party of all the relevant key personnel, those that were best placed to provide the information that we felt we needed for the Royal Commission. And so for us, that included key personnel in areas such as customer assurance, sort of people that our department that looks after collecting all of the relevant key performance indicators and data and complaints registers and so forth. Our HR department in terms of the staffing numbers and information that the commissioners were seeking, and also key people in our clinical areas and our facilities around the care-related questions and so forth. We sought legal advice. We thought it would be prudent for us to seek legal advice. Firstly, it was quite interesting around the question of the invitation and whether we should submit, and it was made fairly clear from us right from the beginning that it would be in our best interest to make a submission to the Royal Commission. So setting that aside, we then sought some information around disclosure, around what we felt was the appropriate way of disclosing the information, and also one of the critical definitions, which was the definition of substandard care. When we received the original letter from the Royal Commission inviting us to submit, the very first thing when we looked at it was asking information around substandard care, but what did they actually mean by that? So we sought some legal advice, and then subsequently to that, as you're probably all aware, LASER, and it was extremely useful, the information that LASER provided following questions from members around that exact question. And then the Royal Commission themselves, through their website, provided some additional information around what they were seeking in terms of substandard care, and some other areas and questions that people had been raising around how they should appropriately submit. So we took all that information on board, and we started working through that within our working party. The key thing we found that we needed to do in order to get on the road to putting a submission together was really to determine what, in our opinion, constituted substandard care, and more generally, what really was the information that the Commission was seeking. In other words, we tried to put some parameters around the information and the responses that we needed to make so that everybody could have clear direction as to what information they needed to gather in order to help us put the submission together. During that conversation, we also agreed to within the working party, we agreed to the format that the submission should take. Within the guidelines of the submission itself, there was reference to trying to limit the submission to no more than 50 pages, but that was per facility. Now, for us, we've got four residential aged care facilities plus a home care division. So we've got 5 services and outlets, as the Commission seemed to refer to the home care division as. So that meant that we could have effectively put in 5 separate submissions totaling about 250 pages. We thought that would be a bit of overkill if we did that, and because a lot of the responses to the questions were on a corporate basis, we felt the best way we could, and the most effective way and efficient way we could make the submission would be to have basically one written submission covering all of the corporate type questions, and then a separate addendum for each of our services and outlets, providing the information effectively in response to questions 1 and questions 2. And before I forget to mention it, we did that in an Excel spreadsheet. That was just the way we did it, because the Commission was seeking a summary of some of the data in an Excel spreadsheet, and we thought the easiest way to do that would be to supplement that summary with extra tabs on the Excel spreadsheet that provided the response to question 1 and the response to question 2, which we'll talk about a bit more in more detail in a moment, as part of each individual addendum for each individual service and outlet. Through that process, we delegated responsibility to the members of the working party to collect the relevant information that they were best placed to collect, including the associated timeframes. I think it's very important that you do put some timeframes around that if you follow the same process we did, because we had, we actually got our submission quite interestingly late, because the Commission sent it to the wrong email address originally. So I think we got our submission on the 29th of November, the letter inviting us to make the submission, and we had till the 7th of January to make the submission. So we didn't have very long, maybe 5 weeks, I think. And I have to say, we were incredible, as an organisation, we were incredibly fortunate that most of those key people that were in our working party hadn't planned over that holiday period to have extended leave. They took the public holidays off, but they were effectively working, which was a bonus, a real benefit for us. We're also somewhat fortunate that we did keep quite detailed electronic records of things like a complaints register with the types of information that the commissioners were seeking, dating back to within that time frame, the 5 years that the commission was seeking. So we were a bit fortunate in that area as well. Then we also, through that process, we also need to determine who would be the central person responsible for coordinating the collection of information. That predominantly fell in terms of the coordination of information with our Customer Assurance Department. And then drafting the final submission, I took responsibility myself for that because there was a lot of information within the submission that I felt was very important to articulate based on a lot of work being done by LASA around the reform agenda. Whilst you're answering the individual questions, there is a great opportunity to provide clarification around how you are answering the question, what your interpretation of the questions, but also some broader detail around within some of those questions to really articulate, I suppose, your feelings about where the reform agenda should be going or what needs to be done in aged care to support quality care and outcomes for older Australians. So through that whole process, the team were extremely busy working for that, and I have to acknowledge the efforts of my team. They were absolutely outstanding. And then we put together effectively what was a draft final submission, which we circulated to key personnel within the organisation, even slightly broader than the working party. And also we sent it off to the legal team just for a final review by them and for any final comments. And when we got all that sort of feedback, comments back, we put that together into the final submission and we lodged it, thankfully, by the due date. I must say it was actually on that day, but by the due date. So that was the process we undertook in terms of putting the submission together. In terms of some of the questions, I might just, before we go to question one, which is the slide that's up there now, I might just make a quick comment because there is the general information section within the submission itself. And for those of you who are thinking, who have maybe a number of facilities, we were able to, within that general submission, separate the information into separate columns and report separately on the information relevant to all of the services and outlets we operate. So just bear in mind, you will need to do that obviously in the general section, the general information section. But in terms of question one was predominantly around reporting occasions of substandard care, including mistreatment and all forms of abuse. And in terms of that, we really looked carefully at the definition of substandard care, as I mentioned previously, and took particular note of the information that came later on the Royal Commission website, which really provided two separate definitions for want of a better analysis. And that was, one was really we should provide occasions where the service or outlet has provided care which did not meet the relevant quality standards under the Quality of Care Principles or any other obligations under the Aged Care Act, such as the Charter of Care Recipients' Rights and Responsibilities. And also, we should also include care or occasions of care in which, in our view, do not meet the high standards of quality and safety that the Australian community expects. Now, in terms of the first part of that, we looked at that and fortunately our organisation has never had a non-compliance and we didn't feel as a group that we were ever in a situation where we did not meet the relevant quality standards or our obligations under those standards. Obviously, each organisation will need to make their own assessment on that. But in terms of the second part, where we needed to provide information around occasions of care where, in our view, we did not meet the high standards of quality and safety that the Australian community expects, was much more difficult to determine. We thought and we debated about how we should go about doing that. And ultimately, because quite frankly, we have no idea exactly what the expectations are of the community. And we felt the best way that we should address that was to really look at occasions where we felt the care we provided did not meet our expected standards. So we really kind of focused on that information, and that was, information that we gather through our quality systems and our KPIs. And it was, to give you an example, it was examples of situations where, for example, there might be a medication error, there might be an incident of poor manual handling that might have led to, say, a skin tear. All those kinds of situations that we picked up through our quality systems that we believed did not meet our expected standards were ones that we reported on in this particular question. So that took a fair amount of time for us to go through and really collate all of that information. Moving on to question 2, this was one around very similar question to question 1, but focusing more on complaints, which is obviously far broader. And in terms of this one, we relied on initially as our main source document, our complaints register, which, as I said, we were very fortunate that we had in electronic format and has been maintained for actually a period longer than 5 years. So we were very lucky that we had that information going back. But we're also conscious that, that even with the best endeavours of the organisation, there would undoubtedly be situations where some complaints that we had received had not been taken up in that complaints register, inadvertently overlooked being added to that complaints register. So we thought, as a safeguard, we would do a bit of a review of all of our emails, electronic files, records, just trying to pick up all of the complaints that our various managers and senior staff had been involved in. And just making sure that we cross-reference that with complaints register to make sure we were capturing all of the information as best that we could. And of course, anything that had gone to an external body, the Complaints Commissioner, the agency, etc., just making sure we checked all of those records and making sure that they were all on the register as well. And then, of course, we went through the process of de-identifying all of that information just to protect all of the residents and family members and people's privacy and confidentiality. We did take the opportunity, though, when we went through the complaints to only, as the Commission was seeking, only really focus on complaints relating to care-related issues. There were, as you would appreciate, there are complaints that you receive from time to time that aren't really care-related, and we tried as best we could to filter those out of the complaints register. Moving on to question 3. Question 3 is really about what your service or outlet has done, really to support the outcomes that the Commission is seeking, in terms of quality, service provision, etc. And this was quite an interesting one because when we discussed what we should put in this, we really didn't want to go too easy on our response to this. We felt it was extremely important that we really showcase the broad range of initiatives and activities that our organisation undertakes as part of our quality framework. It was really an opportunity to really, amongst ourselves, really think about what we do as an organisation to support quality outcomes. And so we started at the obvious basics, things around your policies and procedures, work instructions, etc., your quality framework, the way you gather and monitor information for quality outcomes, key performance indicators, committee structures, to give an example, but also really looking at all of any innovative programs to support outcomes for people with dementia, for example, and all those kind of elements that really make up the organisation to really support good quality outcomes. And we felt it was very important to really spend some time thinking about all of those and making sure that we articulated them as best we could, within the submission, so that the commissioners, when they read it, they got a real sense for the effort that the organisation is undertaking in terms of delivering quality outcomes. In terms of question 4, this one really focused mostly, or exclusively, on younger people in aged care, those younger than 65. I won't spend too much time talking about this because I don't imagine most organisations would have too much difficulty finding the information that the Commission are seeking around the people that you are caring for, if you are caring for people that are under 65. The only question that we found was a little bit more tricky was the last one, question B3, which really asked for each of the age groups, you know, if we are caring for people under 65, what are the reasons why those young people were being provided with services by us, as opposed to a provider that doesn't provide aged care services? We thought we knew the answer to that, but we did undertake a very quick poll of some family members and residents that were in that category. Not that we had a huge number, but we had a number. And in summary, it was really because the families chose to use our services because, in their opinion, it provided the younger person with a care environment and a service offering that really best met their needs. So that was really the way we responded to that particular question. In terms of question 5, this question was around if we experience difficulties in accessing healthcare for care recipients, and I really threw this one to our clinical team and care team because they're at the coalface, they're at the forefront of this. And in terms of their response for us, and again, I appreciate this will be different depending on where you're located and what your personal experiences are, but for us it was mostly around availability of GPs and geriatricians. And also having access to mental health services. Our organisation operates with a number of dementia-specific units, and as we all can appreciate, a large proportion of residents, even not in the dementia-specific units, are suffering some form of dementia or cognitive impairment. Having access to, or mental health issues, and having access to mental health services is extremely important. And so our care team really articulated their views around the difficulty with accessing those services. In terms of question 6, what further changes, if any, could your service or outlet make to provide services of higher quality and greater safety and to improve individual outcomes? And the second part of it, can you identify any barriers to making these improvements? You know, we're as an organisation, we are incredibly proud of the service we provide, but obviously there is always opportunities to improve and provide services better than what we are currently doing. We feel extremely strongly that provision of quality care and safety and the ability to improve the individual outcomes for care recipients is really reliant on the quality, size and relevant skill mix of the workforce you entrust to really deliver that care. And we really focused on that in our response. It would be, in an ideal world, it would be fabulous to be able to provide innovative programs provided by staff with the appropriate skill mix. And you know, it was really around being able to provide both the quality, size and skill mix that we focused our response to. But in terms of the obstacles, sorry, just go back. In terms of the obstacles, the main obstacles that we saw was firstly affordability. You know, in order to do that, it comes at a cost. If you need to increase the size of your workforce, you need to increase the skill mix or change the skill mix of your workforce. Often there's a cost associated with that. So affordability was one. But the other one we spent a bit of time commenting on was just the current labour force constraints. Now, at its basic level, obviously funding is an issue and it's linked very much to affordability. But the reality is that there is a shortage of quality staff out there. There's a labour force shortage, and part of that has got to do with our capacity as a sector to be able to provide competitive wages to those staff. So that's an issue. We made comments on that. But even under the current arrangements, even if funding were to increase, there is still a shortage of quality skilled staff, and that's only going to get worse as we look at this ageing demographic, and there's going to be a need to increase the numbers of staff members servicing a growing ageing population. And this is one of the greatest worries I have is that one of the greatest challenges we have as a sector going forward is, being able to maintain a skilled workforce to deliver the quality outcomes we believe older Australians deserve. And it worries me because, not just around the ability to pay them competitive wages, but just in this current environment where, I think unfairly the aged care sector has been tarnished in terms of the media portrayal of the quality and services being provided to older Australians, that it's driving good people out of the industry, and it's also, at the same time, a barrier to attracting good people into the sector. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges we have going forward, and it's one that I think the government and the sector and all stakeholders need to work collaboratively together to try and resolve. Question 7, this is not dissimilar to question 5 in that it talks about what changes to the interface between aged care system and primary health and acute care and disability services and relevant regulatory systems would assist your service or outlet to provide service of higher quality and greater safety. Again, I threw this to our clinical team. Their response was predominantly around things like communication and handover between hospitals and aged care facilities, as well as just problems associated with accessing geriatric outreach services. There are some in Sydney metropolitan areas that are good, in some areas they're quite poor, and also access to restorative care programs following discharge from hospital into residential aged care settings. I really relied quite heavily on the input and experience of our clinical teams around this. Which brings me to the last question, question 8, which was, in my mind, probably the one that I would be encouraging providers to spend a lot of time in terms of articulating their views, because it's a very broad question around, what changes, if any, to the aged care system would assist you as a provider to provide service of higher quality and greater safety to Australians, including people with disabilities residing in aged care facilities and those with dementia. Now, we did not, our organisation did not overlook the importance of providing a very detailed and comprehensive response to this. And as I said, we really strongly, well, I would strongly recommend that all providers take the opportunity to articulate their views here, because it really does give everybody an opportunity to advance and to highlight what needs to be changed in terms of the reform agenda. In our response, we pointed out that any inquiry into the provision of quality care to older Australians cannot overlook the cost of providing their care. Clearly, if we wish to have an aged care system that delivers care and services that meet the expectations of the community, then there needs to be sufficient funding within the system to deliver services to that standard. Now, we all know that government funding has reduced in real terms year on year, and it's making it extremely difficult for providers to maintain the quality of care and services that they have been. And I've got to say, I think that as the Australian public should be incredibly proud if they understood the efforts of people in the sector providing the services they do within the constraints of the current funding arrangements. And I think that that going forward, one of the things that the Commission really need to look at is the funding. And ultimately, my view is that that should lead to some kind of sensible discussion regarding the balance between, or getting the right balance between government funding, what the government can afford to pay, and what the consumer can afford and should contribute towards the cost of the care and services they are receiving. That's it. I think that's the quick overview from me, Sean. So I don't know whether I'm going to throw back to you. One more slide, sorry. Final reflections. Sorry, thank you, Sean, for reminding me of that. Final reflections from me are, well, firstly, don't underestimate the time and effort required to gather the required information and to draft the submission. I think the second round of submissions are due by the 8th of February, from memory. So there's not a lot of time. So you really need to get moving on putting your submission together. This worked very well for us, and that was delegating responsibility to appropriate personnel where possible. I know that may not be possible in all circumstances, but if you can get a team around you to help you to get the information together, that helps. And finally, as I've mentioned already, really take the opportunity to highlight the deficiencies in the current system and how these could be best addressed. All right.
That's great. Thanks very much, Rob. That was
Thank you,
extremely informative. And as we said up front, this is very much focusing around the process of preparing a submission, not necessarily focusing on the content of what any provider would put in their submission. But now's the opportunity to hear from you, our members and the participants in the webinar. There's the chat function if you'd like to submit your questions using that function, and I'll be able to read them off the screen and ask Rob those questions as they come through. But perhaps as a starting point, Rob, I'd be interested to know, reflecting now, having gone through the process, how valuable do you think this was as an exercise for your executive team, for your board, for your organisation, to be able to critically reflect on examples of substandard care and consider what are community expectations, and then forensically go through your performance against those measures? I'd just be interested as your reflections on the process.
Thanks, Sean. Look, I think it was extremely valuable. I think in fairness, it would have been wonderful if we would have had longer than around 5 weeks to put the submission together, because we were really under the pump in terms of going through and collating all the information. But in terms of the, I suppose, an unintended consequence of making the submission, it was hugely valuable. What it did show to us, well, firstly, it enabled us to do a very warts and all forensic examination of the organisation, which was good in itself. And it did uncover some areas where we recognised that we could improve on the systems that we currently have. I mentioned earlier that we've been maintaining a complaints register for many, many years, and a centralised database, for want of a better word, with that information that the commissioners were seeking. But as we did that kind of analysis and double check and made sure that we were picking up all of the complaints and so forth, we recognised that, for various reasons, and they probably are obvious now that we're looking back at it, but for various reasons, some of them did not find their way onto the complaints register. We dealt with them all appropriately and as we should have, and they're all responded to. But we were able to have a look at our systems and improve those systems to make sure that we're a little bit tighter and more robust in terms of collecting that information. And it enabled us to improve in that area, and I think that would be a benefit going forward. Good.
We've got a very straight question. How many pages was your submission all up?
I've got it in my bag. The submission itself, the written part, the corporate part of it, was probably around about 40 pages, or thereabouts, 30 something, I think, from memory. And then, of course, there were the addendums. Now, they were in, as I mentioned, we did them in an Excel spreadsheet. So you can debate about how many pages they are, depending on how you format them and so forth. But I think that overall we probably fell within the parameters that the Commission were looking at.
Okay. Another question here. Is it felt that discretionary register type incidents should be included as substandard care?
Discretionary in terms of incidents of abuse, I'm presuming we're talking about.
It just says discretionary register type incidents. Yeah.
Generally, no. I mean, if it's the discretionary ones I'm thinking of, where a person with dementia, for example, is the perpetrator, then no, because I think and that was we didn't disclose that because I think the Commission is seeking occasional substandard care being delivered by the provider itself, not something that inadvertently may happen in terms of another demented resident.
Yeah.
And so forth.
There's also a kind of an extension of that. Are complaints considered to be are complaints around ancillary services or food considered as substandard care?
Good question. I think we took a bit of a balanced view. It really depended on the extent of the complaint and really how severe it was. If we felt it was incredibly minor, then no, we didn't report on it. But if it really had an adverse or potentially was a complaint around nourishment or anything that you would say was more severe, then yes, we included it.
Okay. And again, getting back to the format of your response to questions 1 and question 2.
Yep.
Now, you had a spreadsheet, I think you'd say.
Correct, yep.
And so was there a summary of that in your submission proper, and then you could then go and refer to an attachment of that spreadsheet? How did that work?
That's correct. So in the wording or what we're articulating in the submission to, we referenced it. So I presume everybody's had a good look at the submission as the guidelines or the request itself. Question 1 and question 2 have an Excel spreadsheet, comes with the submission. What we did is we populated that Excel spreadsheet with the summary of the information, and then but we expanded that spreadsheet to have 2 additional tabs. One tab basically for question 1, and one tab for question 2. So it provided all the information on an Excel spreadsheet, because that was the easiest way for us to download the information anyway from our database. And we did an individual addendum or spreadsheet like that for each of our services and for our home care division.
Okay, good.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does. So look, please keep your questions coming in. I guess another question I'd have for you, whilst you've been going through this process, what have you been doing to keep your residents, your clients and their families, but also your staff and other stakeholders informed? How have you managed that process inside your organisation?
So in terms of the Royal Commission itself, we have done broad communication to all of our families and residents around the Royal Commission process. And we've been very open with them that we really welcome a commission or inquiry into quality and safety in aged care, anything that is potentially could improve quality and safety in aged care, whilst at the same time obviously giving our residents and family members a commitment to the service quality and our expectations around the services that we deliver. Similarly, we've been providing communications to our staff around exactly the same thing. In terms of the actual submission to the Royal Commission, to be perfectly frank, the timeframes were so tight, we haven't been able to broadly communicate the fact that we are submitting to the Royal Commission to our family members, but that will happen in due course.
Okay. Again, keep those questions coming in. I'm here with Rob Ory from aged care provider in Sydney, Montefiore. I have a question here. Was there any legal advice provided about your submission that you could share with providers? So maybe not going into the content, but some of the themes that perhaps your legal advisors were applying when they were looking at the submission.
I've got to be very careful, obviously, in sharing legal advice. So I probably have to temper my response a little bit.
Absolutely,
and be a little bit careful. Effectively, though, I think in summary I can say that the initial legal advice we received from our legal advisors was consistent with what subsequently was clarified by the Commission in their website. So we were very keen, probably the biggest thing we were very keen on getting legal advice on was what is the definition of substandard care and how we should respond to that. And I'm pleased to say, and I'm sure our legal firm is also pleased to hear, that the advice we got from our legal team was consistent with what subsequently came out of from the Royal Commission. Other than that, just advice around de-identifying information. They had a fairly strong view on making sure that we operated with and being incredibly mindful to obviously privacy and confidentiality constraints. in terms of, families, residents, but also staff members around, some of the allegations and so forth. So we had to make sure we were very careful and took some time de-identifying, which was a big job in itself. That's probably all I could really comment on. Otherwise, I'll be getting into legal advice.
That's a fair response. There's another question. We're under the impression that the Royal Commission's request for information is in a PDF format, so that it is word searchable. Does the Excel spreadsheet format meet the requirement? Was that something that came up in your submission?
No, we felt it did because, and we haven't had anything back from the Commission saying that our submission was not in the appropriate form. But we felt that given that the submission was asking for a summary of the data in an Excel spreadsheet anyway, and given that it was extremely likely that they would be downloading information from the PDF readable file into some kind of spreadsheet, that would be our assumption. We felt that it was fine, and unless I hear differently, I think that was acceptable.
Okay, and another question here: were any of your complaints systemic?
Yeah.
And how did you define systemic?
Yeah, interesting. We spoke about that as well. Our response to that was effectively that when we investigated any of the occasions of substandard care that were reported on or the complaints that were reported on, when we initially did the investigation as part of our normal process, we didn't uncover any deficits in our policies, procedures or systems that contributed to those particular occasions of substandard care or complaints. And because during that initial investigative process we didn't uncover that, we felt quite confident in saying that they were not systemic, that they were individual instances or occasions.
Okay, I've had another question here. Are we able to receive a copy of the presentation so you can share it with other staff? Yes, you can. As is normal practice, we will have a recording of this webinar made available to our members. We'd anticipate that should be available by no later than close of business on Wednesday this week. I'll put out a last call for questions now, and whilst you're just submitting any final questions, I'll just provide a brief update on a number of Royal Commission matters flowing on from the first formal directions hearing, which was conducted last week. So on your screens, you'll see a summary of some of the key quotes that were made either by the Commissioners or by the Council assisting. I think it's fair to say that if you go through the transcript and look at I guess the tenor, the tone and also the content, it's as exactly what you would have expected as a reflection of the terms of reference in the letters patent that were issued to the Commissioners. Very much a balance between we need to understand where the system has let older Australians and their families down, but also we need to understand examples of good practice and innovation in order to be able to then determine what it is that we need to do differently or better in order to ensure that the aged care system meets the needs of older Australians now and into the future. On the issue of the directions hearing process, there was a number of activities that were outlined by Council assisting. They mentioned there would be a research program that would run parallel to the process, which would provide insight and information into the process, but also recommendations that might stem from the Commission. They mentioned the possibility of surveys, that some papers would be circulated for consultation and comment, and that there would be hearings conducted in capital cities as well as regional centres. And there was many different ways that people can engage in the process, either through formal submissions in written form. People can ring up and record a submission. And then there's also other activities that were explained in the course of the directions hearing. For providers, I think there were some very clear messages for providers of aged services outlined in the directions hearing. The first thing to note was, I think it was Commissioner Briggs mentioned that the short response times that have been required to date from providers will be the normal, and specifically because of the deadlines that the Royal Commission is working towards. They talked about the submissions that have been requested from providers are coming in. There was some information that was perhaps not communicated as well as it might have been in the press with regards to the responses from providers, where it was reported there was only 83 providers that currently responded to the request for information, knowing that there is still outstanding deadline until February for all providers to respond. But it was interesting that one of the commissioners did mention that they would compare the information that's been provided by providers with the information from regulators. And so I think that gives a clear insight into the process there. The commissioners noted that they haven't compelled providers to provide information, but they also said that providers that didn't engage with the requests do draw attention to themselves and their practices. And so I think that's a clear message that, as we've said all along, that our industry fully supports the Royal Commission process, and we actively encourage everybody to be involved in having your say in participating in the process. They also mentioned that beyond the request for information, providers can also make separate submissions. So if you feel that there's anything not adequately covered in the request for information that you're providing, you can make a separate submission. And there was also a further information provided by Counsel Assisting. I think it was Counsel Assisting. I have to check that. But the point was made, I think, that somewhere along the line, the Commission had been approached by individuals in the community that maybe have current legal arrangements with providers with regards to disclosing of information. And the instructions from the Commission of that was that they believe that those disclosure arrangements should be waived, and that there was mention that there would be grave concerns if any operators instructed staff not to talk to the Royal Commission or withhold information. The next steps for the Commission, as outlined in the directions hearing, is that the first set of substantive public hearings commence in February, 11th of February in Adelaide. The focus for that first 2-week period is very much just understanding the system as it currently operates, and specifically looking at the key features of the system around quality and safety and complaints and how things work in practice, but also being able to then expand on some of the challenges experienced not only by but older Australians and their families and advocates, but also the other elements of the systems, the aged care workers, the providers and the like. It is in that context that LASER has been asked to produce a witness statement, which members would know that we're currently working on, and we anticipate that we will be called to speak to the Commission in that first set of substantive hearings in February. I'll just check to see where we're up to with questions and see if there's anything more we can add. Interesting one. Here's one for you, Rob, just on do we need to use the document management protocol on the RC website for lodging our submission? Was that something that you referred to specifically in your process?
In terms of making the submission, no, we just basically lodged it to the website, the email address that was included in the letter. Is that the question? I might just point out though that interestingly enough, after we submitted, we waited for a few days and were expecting to get an automatic acknowledgement of the submission going in, but it wasn't forthcoming. So we chased that up and ultimately got acknowledgement of it actually going in. So that might be rectified by now, but I would suggest for your own records that if you don't get an acknowledgement back, follow them up so that you've got a record that you've actually put the submission in.
Yeah, that's a good point, Rob. And participants will see on the screen there, this is the support that LASER's affording our members. We've got the Royal Commission support package. It's a combination of information which many members would be receiving our Royal Commission updates on a regular basis. We've produced a number of resources to support our members communicate to their staff and residents and clients and other stakeholders. We're providing advice as and when required to our members. And also there's, you'll see there, the LASER Member Support Services brochure, which outlines a number of services across legal support, communication support, risk management, etc., that the LASER affiliates have offered to our members, and more often than not at a discounted rate for our members. Also note there the contact points, our 1300 number, but also our dedicated Royal Commission support email address. That last question around the document management protocol might be a good one to submit to our contact point here, because we could get a direct response from the Royal Commission on that one. And also note that Laser's industry representation continues where we're sought for comment with regards to the Royal Commission process. We actively participate in that, and also when required to bring further evidence and a balance to some of the public commentary. Look, just in closing, I'll have one more look for questions. What are you now doing, Rob, to prepare for the next phase? Now you've lodged your submission. Where to next, Rob?
I think like everybody that's made a submission, we're just waiting to see what does happen next. You know, whether we're asked for more information, whether we're asked to produce more documents, whether we're called up as a witness to testify. I think nobody really knows. We've really just waiting to see what happens next.
Okay. Look, with that said, I'll just want to share with members the opportunity to participate in our Excellence in Age Services Awards. The categories are Individual Award, a Team Award, the Rising Star and the Organisation Award. This was a very successful initiative that for the first time ever we conducted last year to have a national set of Age Services Awards for our membership. Nomination closing dates are there on your screens, and this is the opportunity, as much as we've been talking about the Royal Commission process is an opportunity to identify good practice. Here's another way to do that and hopefully be able to correlate what you've put forward in your submissions, identifying opportunities that you can then nominate your staff, your teams, and perhaps your entire organisation for consideration of an Excellence in Age Services Award. Just in closing, let me leave you with the comments that were made by Commissioner Tracy when he ended up closing the Royal Commission direction hearing last week. He said the hallmark of a civilised society is how it treats its most vulnerable, and he acknowledged that the elderly members of our community are often in that category. I think it was very telling that his final comments in the public address was frail and elderly members of the community deserve to and should be looked after in the best possible way. We, that is we as the Royal Commissioners, intend to do our best to see that happens. And there's no argument that that's exactly what our industry is keen to ensure happens in terms of the way that we care for older Australians both now and into the future. So let me say in closing, I want to say a very heartfelt thank you to Rob Ory from Montefiore. Really appreciate you being able to come and share your case study reflections at short notice. Hopefully it's been of value to our members. I do reiterate for all participating in the webinar today, firstly, we will be circulating a copy of the slides and the recording within 48 hours. So you'll be able to share this with members of your team that haven't been able to participate in the process today. Secondly, you will also all receive, if not already, but shortly after the close of the webinar, a survey to provide feedback on the webinar experience to ensure that we can consistently improve the way that we work to meet the needs of our members. So on that note, thank you very much. I wish you well with your submissions to the Royal Commission, and don't hesitate to reach out to Laser. It's our role to support you in this process. Thank you and bye for now.